Hey you guys, what's up? I'm Ashley from heavenathome.org, and this is the Heaven at Home podcast, where my goal is to encourage you in your personal growth journey while being open, honest, and owning my story. We have faith-based conversations and tackle a bunch of different tough topics. Check out the description to follow me and learn more. Remember, you are fully known and deeply loved. Let's do this. Hey you guys, what's up? So, y'all are not gonna be able to guess where I am right now. I am in my closet. Why am I in my closet, you ask? Well, here's the thing. We recently moved. I'm in an apartment, and the acoustics in this apartment really bother me. I spent I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes trying to see if I can make it work in my living room. And the echo, although, it might be a nice little space for singing, it is just I like very crisp, clean cut audio. And, it was just really bothering me. So here I am in my closet. So you might notice actually after this point, after this episode comes out, that I'm going to be creating a lot of podcasts that kind of echo the information that I'm sharing in my blog posts. They're going to be very much the same. I write how I talk, and kind of vice versa. So you're going to notice a lot of similarities with that. The reason that I'm doing that is because I want to basically just share all the information in different mediums. So if you want to just quickly skim, get to the point, maybe you'll like a blog post. If you are in the car driving, running some errands, doing chores, whatever, and you want to listen, here's something for you. Eventually I might do video, but honestly, I'm just not there yet, you guys. I'm sorry. I'm really trying to get my life together. So today we're going to talk about just 15 things to look for that can potentially break or damage or kill dating relationships. I know it's a little kind of depressing, but here we go. And I did actually just want to add this disclaimer. I'm very much aware that the things that can hurt dating people's relationships can also hurt married couples' relationships. It's just I want to clarify the audience or the demographic that this post was written for, and that's just because I have honestly different value systems set in place for married couples. So just kind of have that in mind when I share all this stuff. So if I were to break down all the 15 things to look for and just say simply to the point, this is what it is, this is what it comes down to, it's 3 simple things. Okay, a relationship is dependent on, number 1, the individual health of each person. That's on a mental, emotional, spiritual level. Second is the willingness of each person in the relationship to make it work, to continue to put in effort. And the third thing is whether or not there is love involved, because love is kind of this, I'm going to say, I would say it's almost like a secret ingredient. If genuine love is involved, it kind of changes everything. So I do actually have a very high idealistic standard of what love is, and that's just because of my belief in Jesus. So to get more information on the kind of love that I'm talking about, the kind of love that I'm looking for, I do recommend checking out the post called How Do I Know I'm in Love, or the episode that I'm going to record on that topic. All right, now you guys are going to see how much of an in-depth thinker I am when it comes to this stuff. There are different kinds of dating relationships. I think there's casually dating, which is more like courting, and then there's dating relationships where it's kind of official. There are labels, boyfriend, girlfriend involved. So casually dating is where you're basically just getting to know someone for who they are without any expectations of an exclusive commitment. You're just getting to know them. A dating relationship specifically is when both individuals are together as a couple, boyfriend, girlfriend, and it does imply a level of exclusivity. It implies a decision or just like a basic understanding that each person in the relationship is genuinely serious about the other. Another thing that a dating relationship implies is that there is some possible intention for longevity, like there might be an intention for marriage and a future with this person. And the reason why dating relationships are kind of tricky is because it kind of encompasses both. Like you're still getting to know someone, but there's also a level of commitment. So considering both of those things put together, it can lead to a little bit more heartbreak just because both people are more invested. So I just want to clarify, when you're dating, I think you should always, always, always be thinking about whether or not the other person is a good partner for you, a good match. And then also just taking some time to consider those things that I mentioned, those 3 simple things that I mentioned before. Like, is there love there? Is there willingness there? Is there effort? And are they healthy? Like, are they able to engage in a healthy relationship because they're healthy people? So definitely be objective. And I feel like looking for these signs can kind of help in that regard. Just when it comes to thinking about like, hey, is this really someone I can see myself moving forward with? People assume that in order to be intentional in a relationship, you also have to be committed. And that is not true when you're dating. Being intentional means knowing what you want, knowing what you don't want, knowing what you're willing to settle for, and knowing what is just a complete deal breaker. And it also means following through with what you know in your heart is best. So, those are just like foundations for dating. Maybe I can do like a whole other separate thing for that. All right, so the things to look for. I'm going to mention 15. This is not an all-inclusive list. Honestly, I think the list could go on and on. But I feel like it does kind of encompass a lot. All right, and relationships involve 2 people. So for each of these signs, they can go both ways. All right, so number 1. The number 1 thing. Oh, and this is not in like a hierarchical, like most significantly significant. It's just I kind of ordered these how I wanted to. Okay, so number 1, ignoring your own needs. This is a super, super big one. In a relationship, each person has a responsibility to themselves to meet their own needs and an obligation to the other person to care for theirs. So what I mean by that is your first priority, regardless of whether you're in a relationship or not, is to meet your own needs for yourself. That's a basic foundation. It establishes really good, healthy boundaries. But that doesn't mean that you necessarily completely neglect the other person or their desires or their needs or things like that. It just means that you recognize the obligation to the other person simply because you care for them. So when you're in a relationship with another person, you do want to make sure that they feel loved, that they feel like they belong. You want to make sure that they feel that you respect them, that you honor them, because each person involved is honestly worthy of that. And I don't know if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but that can kind of give some insight into that as well. I think especially in the honeymoon phases of dating, ignoring your own needs uh, is kind of I know like everyone's kind of caught up in the infatuation phase, but the thing is, it kind of sets a standard. It kind of sets a normal for what the relationship is going to look like in the future. So in the very beginning, even when you're all like lovey-dovey and stuff, it's still really important to be intentional about, meeting your needs, having relationships with your friends, your family, and just making sure that you establish a healthy balance of life. Because, like I said, like that'll set you up for success in the future. Number 2 on the list is communication gaps. So, a large part of the way people communicate is determined by how they think, how they feel, how they see the world, and also how they want to be seen. Um, I remember taking several communication courses. I actually just forgot that I minored in communication for a second. That's so embarrassing. Okay. The process of communication can pretty much be simplified into 2, possibly 3 simple steps. So, number 1, sending a message, 2, receiving that message, and 3, interpreting that message. So, I do want to specify so everyone doesn't get like completely worried, but communication gaps are totally normal. Okay, so don't freak out. They are to be expected. Those gaps can be shortened, by having things in common. They can be shortened by getting to know a person more and more over time. And they can also be shortened by asking questions, like questions that provide clarification. So there are a lot of inside and outside influences that cause communication gaps to widen. And it's the widening thing that kind of becomes a problem. So, like differences in essential values, differences of important opinions, underlying motives, underlying emotions, frequency of arguments, or like outside stress, outside frustration from any other area of life. All that stuff can cause communication gaps to widen. And especially if there is not enough questioning happening, to clarify, it can lead to just an overall tone of misunderstanding without resolve. So, again, communication gaps are normal, but the only time they really cause a problem is when either person is just simply no longer willing to take the time to understand the other. All right, number 3, insecurity. Insecurity breaks relationships, people. All right, so this could actually mean a couple different things. So there is physical and emotional safety or security in a relationship. That is essential. It's necessary. Each person should be considered valuable and irreplaceable to the other. That's what I mean by emotional security in particular. However, if someone in the relationship has a broken history, a trauma that they know or don't know about, or low self-esteem, this can cause unrealistic, self-sabotaging kinds of insecurity that could break the relationship if they're left unaddressed or just left unhealed. It can also be something that happens within the context of a relationship. If something happened within the relationship that breaks someone's trust, even if it's not the root of the issue, like even if insecurity is not the root of the issue and it's just a consequence of something that happened, it can damage the relationship if that trust is not repaired. So that can take time and a certain amount of grace and understanding to kind of work through. A very popular kind of insecurity that most people are familiar with is like jealousy, or even someone kind of being like a helicopter partner, like always wanting to know what the other person's doing, where they're going, who they're hanging out with. Whether it's caused by something in their own personal history or if something happened that broke trust, insecurity breaks a relationship because it kind of creates a lot of tiny but frequent little behaviors um, that just kind of mess with the tone. All right, number 4 kind of relates to communication in a sense. Um, it's emotional triggers, but specifically emotional triggers that cause difficult emotions. So, an emotional trigger is when something happens that causes someone to react internally. So, maybe someone starts unexplainably laughing or crying. Maybe someone just quickly gets angry or shuts down. Um, or it could even kind of look like anxiety, like intense, quick feelings of panic or restlessness. A lot of times with emotional triggers, unless someone's like very much aware, there can be occasions where either person is not very conscious about what's happening. Like it kind of just happens and they don't really think about why they reacted the way that they did. Um, so when something big, I guess, happens to a person that causes them to be triggered, the emotions that they experience, especially when they're very difficult to process or work through, they're kind of like a blindfold. So it could be something that was said, it could be the way something was said, it could be something that happened that reminded them of like a previous trauma they went through. But it's also kind of interesting to know that um, like it's possible for an emotional trigger to result in a more positive, maybe even healing or cathartic experience. I shared a personal story about that in the blog post, but I'm not going to do that here. um, but yeah, so emotional triggers aren't always bad. Um, in in not so severe cases, uh, the emotions that come up from being triggered, they'll be short lived, they'll be infrequent, and they're able to be coped with, managed, talked through. If the other person's really understanding, they can even be accommodated. You know, like someone might be willing to tailor the way that they say something or do something, whatever. Um, but it's really, it's really the difficult emotional triggers that break relationships because they usually result in unhealthy emotional outbursts. And they kind of signal that, you know, there actually is a problem somewhere. Um, so if either person is not able to get um, some control, if they're not able to manage it on their own, it's possible that it'll just interfere with the overall tone of the relationship. All right, number 5 is a lack of self awareness. Um, so, for those of you who don't know, self awareness is basically just a knowledge of ourselves, our character, how we think, how we act, how we interact, how we feel, what motivates us, what inspires us. The reason a lack of self awareness causes problems is usually because if it's going on for like a really long amount of time, the person who is not self aware is going to explode and they're not going to know why. So, here are just, I mean, I kind of want to go into this a little bit, but some signs that someone is not self aware include these things I'm about to list. All right, so an inability to notice or express how someone thinks or how they feel, an inability to determine a long-term intention, an inability to determine internal motives, like reasons why someone's doing what they're doing. It can look like someone making impulsive commitments based on whatever ideals they have, either for the future or for the relationship. It can look like, and this is something you can either see or not see, but it can look like someone quickly dismissing things that they're noticing about the relationship that are actually worth thinking about. Like, they shouldn't dismiss it. They should actually kind of process that and talk that out. It'll look like a lack of emotional intelligence, immature behaviors, and like the number one thing that's gonna literally kill the relationship is burnout. Kind of like what I mentioned before. If it goes on for a really, really long amount of time and the person isn't aware of themselves and they're not able to cater to themselves, if they're not able to sense when they're stressed, frustrated, or, like all those things, like if they're not aware, they can't deal with stuff. So eventually it's going to come out. So in retrospect, when a lack of self-awareness is involved, it's going to look like someone was naive, or like they might actually find themselves saying things like that, like, I didn't think about that, I didn't realize I felt this way. Yeah, so that's that one. All right, number 6, which kind of seems to be like an underlying one for a lot of these signs, is unhealed trauma. All right, it's actually pretty common, I guess. So if either of the people in the relationship has experienced trauma and they're unaware of how it affects them, that usually also implies that they don't know how to cope with it, specifically cope with it in healthy ways, So if unhealed trauma is like something that affects how someone perceives themselves, how someone perceives the other person, if it affects communication, if it affects like conflict management stuff, like all that stuff, if it's not dealt with appropriately, if it's not dealt with in healthy ways, it has the potential to create a toxic climate. So obviously the intensity of this problem could be like on a case-by-case basis. But trauma also causes like those triggers we were talking about before. So it can result in very, very strong expressions of anger or withdrawal or depression or anxiety. And I think in even more severe cases, there might even be like physical symptoms that come about from that. So I do just want to say this little thing. Regardless of how much you may want to make things work, the relationship simply cannot be healthy if you or the other person are not healthy. So healthy relationships require healthy people, right? So it's not necessarily a deal breaker, but it is something that's very important to get checked out, and it's something important to learn how to process, learn how to cope with, all that stuff. All right, number 7. Oof, this is a tough one. All right, number 7 is a lack of integrity. So people change, people grow, people develop over time, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think in common culture, people use the knowledge of someone changing and growing and developing over time as an excuse to bow out. And I personally believe that change is really the only thing that can allow a relationship to thrive. Obviously, speaking of positive changes. So when I say what breaks a relationship is a lack of integrity, I'm talking specifically about a person who's changed in a way that compromises their morals or their values. So like at the start of a relationship, like each person should be getting to know each other and should be able to determine like whether or not their values are aligned, like family values. Like, do they believe in marriage? Do they want to have kids? Do they have the same beliefs about religion? Do they have the same beliefs about marriage, lifestyle, finances? Like, the whole list could go on and on. So when I say a lack of integrity, I'm basically meaning when someone in the relationship says something is important to them. And it turns out that it was something that was very important to you as well. But then years later, that changes. To me, that's a lack of integrity. So, for example, if someone says in the beginning, oh, yeah, like, I really want to have kids. I've thought about it. I've considered all the implications of what it means to start a family, and it's something that I really want to go after. And then, years later, after you guys are married, the person decides that they don't want to have kids anymore. That can break a relationship. It's an example of a lack of integrity. Or even when people, like sometimes in Christian dating relationships, someone will profess to be Christian, and then you notice some mismatches in what they say and what they do. That's also a lack of integrity. So it can look like a lot of different things. But basically, like, yeah, and I guess that's basically it. Like, integrity is just having certain core beliefs that define who a person is and how they live their lives. And, core beliefs will always have an opportunity to be challenged in life. Like, sometimes it's not always easy to remain true to who you are and what you believe. But when you do have integrity, those values, those morals, those principles, those beliefs, they remain constant. So yeah, that's a tough one. Even for me, like, sometimes I'm just like, Holy Spirit, I really need your help, All right, so number 8, unhealthy coping strategies. Like I'm really starting to feel like all these things are really, connecting. All right. Unhealthy coping strategies. So, coping strategies involve how we think and how we behave, specifically under pressure, under stress. So, it's how we act and it's how we react in, stressful, uncomfortable situations. And it doesn't only surface when there are problems in the relationship specifically. Unhealthy coping strategies can also kind of surface from being under pressure at work or at school, or like even if there's like financial issues or family issues. So I'm just going to name a few examples of unhealthy coping strategies. So avoiding the issues, repressing or denying those issues, depressive behaviors like sleeping too much, eating too much, in like, very serious cases, drug abuse or excessive alcohol use can be involved. It can even look like making assumptions, jumping to conclusions, impulsive decision making, isolating, overthinking, overreacting, like a whole bunch of stuff. I have a couple other signs that you can look for in the blog post. But basically, coping strategies and defense mechanisms can do a lot of damage when they start leaking into the relationship if they're unhealthy. So it's important to know, like, coping strategies are not intrinsically bad. It's how we choose to cope that makes the difference there. So I include a list of some healthy coping strategies in my blog. Again, I'm going to name a few. Number 1, praying. Yes, praise the Lord. I was literally just talking about that. Going through, kind of going through that process and partnering with the Holy Spirit in that's a huge one. So praying, exercising, taking care of your mind, your body, setting healthy boundaries, asking for help, when you need it, problem solving or asking people to help you think through stuff. That's also a really effective coping strategy that could work. All right, number 9. This is a big one, a frequent one, and it's one that most people tend to deny. All right, number 9, expectations that the other person could change or should change. So, in dating relationships, if expectations are known and communicated and agreed on by both people in the relationship, expectations are not a problem. Okay? I feel like that's super important to mention. Healthy and appropriate expectations and standards are good in dating relationships. So, the most obvious case of expectations that the other person could change or should change is if those expectations are just unrealistic, which is a really big one sometimes. Um, but I think a lot of times people set expectations for each other um, without realizing it. And I came up with two scenarios that I think can kind of like express what it actually looks like in relationships. So, number one, you start dating or continue a relationships where there are different values on marriage, different values on family or religion, and either person has the hidden or, verbally expressed expectation that the other person will change their mind or can change their mind. A second scenario where this might be an issue, this one is actually kind of interesting because it can happen in the middle of a relationship. So you start realizing all the things you don't actually like about the other person, and instead of thinking about what you can or are willing to change about yourself, you spend time thinking about all the things that the other person should be doing differently. Another, I know I said I was only going to mention two, but I just came up with another one. A third one is when someone has behaved a certain way for the whole course of a relationship, to an extent that the other person starts to expect that from them. Like, it's no longer something that is perceived to be done out of the kindness of their heart. It's more so like something that they should be doing because it's something they've always done. That might be relatable to some people. All right, number 10, a lack of trust. So, I feel like I heard this quote somewhere, but I don't know where it came from. Trust tends to be hard-earned and easily lost. So, a lack of trust can be justified or unjustified. So, one person may have betrayed the trust of another, or on the other hand, one person may just be paranoid or an extremely jealous or anxious person. So, there may even be a situation where both of those apply, which I mentioned in the post, where one person broke the other person's trust and resulted in that person becoming paranoid or anxious or jealous. So, it could look as simple and as common as a broken promise or a lack of follow through. But it becomes a problem in a relationship, and it does damage to a relationship when someone can no longer trust the word of the other person. A lack of trust can even come up when you find that someone is saying one thing and then doing something else, that kind of breaks trust as well. Number 11, this is a really easy one to fall into if we're not careful. But basically taking each other for granted, that really breaks relationships. As a foundation, I think it's super important that each person feels safe and secure. That's necessary for a relationship to be healthy. Physical safety should go without question, but this includes the emotional safety aspect that I'm mentioning as well. So, other foundations. Each person should be able to trust that the other person values them. They should be able to trust that they are not considered easily expendable or replaceable. And if there's any fear, any lack of confidence in that area, then something is wrong somewhere, and that needs to be addressed. So but I did just want to take some time to, express that, like, those needs for belonging, those needs for feeling valued, and just that general need for safety and security. Like, I'm secure in my relationship. I'm not scared. That is a solid foundation, and it should be a solid foundation for every couple. This only becomes a problem. Like, taking each other for granted is a problem, because it it's it encourages people, to almost get too comfortable. And I personally think that this can come about aggressively or passively. So, um, aggressively taking someone for granted would mean that the person makes it incredibly obvious. Like, they assume that you will always be there. They assume you'll always apologize. Um, there's regular disrespect. Um, Another way that it can be expressed aggressively is when one person in the relationship does absolutely nothing, to change behaviors that sabotage feelings of safety or security. Um, and even until the last minute, like when they finally notice that, you're at the end of your rope and you're kind of done, then they're all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, like, I'll do whatever I'll do whatever it takes to make this work. They wait until the very end of your rope to be romantic, to express love, to apologize, or to make the necessary changes. So that, to me, is aggressively taking someone for granted. A passive way of taking someone for granted, which I mentioned a couple different ways that this could be seen in the blog post, but passive is less obvious, and it usually happens by accident, and it doesn't involve a lack of respect for the other person. It just kind of comes up when life gets busy, people get busy, we get kind of stuck in the ebbs and flows of our days, and we may find that one person tends to initiate, one person tends to communicate, one person tends to serve, plan dates, give surprise gifts, express love, give words of affirmation, and it's possible that might be obvious to both people. Like, both people are aware of the normal ebb and flow of the relationship. So the passive attitude of taking someone for granted, really only becomes a problem when the relationship starts to require work, and either person is either consciously or subconsciously unwilling to be more intentional with how they are. So maybe connecting with the other person was easy at one point, and now it's not. Maybe each person has gotten busy, or, they focused on a different area of life, and, some quality time was lost. Maybe someone tends to think they're always right, and the relationship is reaching a point where that person needs to grow, and understand that they need to apologize, stuff like that. There are tons of possible scenarios, but yeah, it could definitely do some damage. All right, the 12th look for, I think it's my favorite because it's the shortest. Complacency. Complacency kills relationships. And I love this. I'm just going to read it because it's literally one sentence. Complacency breaks relationships because it doesn't care. It is numbingly content or indifferent. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Yep, that'll do it. All right, number 13. Having something negative to say often. If even just one person in the relationship is very critical, very pessimistic, or full of complaints all the time, it's going to mess with the climate of the relationship. I don't know if you've ever heard the term Debbie Downer, or a glass half empty kind of person, but that can be really mentally and emotionally draining. to the people who have to hear it most of the time. And to be honest, I'm going to happily throw myself under the bus. This is something that I used to have a serious problem with. I had a really bad habit of judging people that I felt were judging other people. I know it's kind of weird. But I would be very critical of their language, of things that they would say to someone who, didn't meet their standards or expectations. I expressed that a lot. And I found that was actually coming from a really broken place. And I realized I didn't always have to advocate for the underdog all the time. Yeah. So, number 14, disrespect. Ugh, this one really bothers me. Having respect for someone means honoring them, honoring their feelings, honoring their needs, and understanding that the other person has intrinsic value. They're important. In a relationship, respect looks like being thoughtful about the other person, about their desires, their goals, their behaviors. And I want to get the most obvious example out of the way. Any form of, disrespect that is blatant and obvious and unapologetic is not okay. Name calling, lying, gaslighting, swearing, like cursing during arguments, throwing stuff, being demeaning or condescending, being physically or emotionally abusive, flirting with others, no, that's just a no-go when you're in an exclusive dating relationship. Okay. But here's the thing. Sometimes disrespect is more common and less obvious than that. This obviously goes for men and women, but women especially, I think we all might want to listen up here. If women tend to be driven by love, men tend to be driven by respect in relationships. But I do want to clarify, love and respect, those are both important. So here's the thing. It's the sneaky signs of disrespect that do the most damage and break relationships because they happen over time. And like I said, they're not always noticeable. So it could look like a lack of regard for someone's freedom, freedom of choice, freedom of privacy. Disrespect can look like a lack of regard for another person's time, like not showing up on time, not being on time. It could look like a lack of regard for someone's boundaries. It could look like carelessness, indifference, and I have some other ones mentioned on here as well. A very early one that I remember doing when I was young and naive and stupid was the silent treatment. I wonder where I learned that from. So yeah, sometimes we make mistakes. We show up late, we cancel plans at the last minute, we get distracted. We fail to be understanding or respectful of people's boundaries. Honestly, sometimes disrespect is unintentional, or just, immature. But, it's important to understand, at one point or another, we are going to disappoint people. But what makes the difference and, causes things to change for the better is a willingness to do better next time. So first off, understanding and communicating what is most important to you and understanding and receiving what is most important to the other person, that can help repair what's been broken. So yeah, that's something to look for. And then number 15, it does kind of align with the integrity thing, but it's slightly different. I think this is one of the most underestimated signs of a broken relationship, and I feel like it's one of the things that could be avoided early on. So misaligned values or misaligned lifestyles. So when you're in the talking phase of a relationship, you're just like casually dating, maybe even before the labels come up. Direct, explicit communication should be the first thing you do when you start dating someone new. Like, get to the nitty gritty stuff in the very beginning. Like, before you get to a point where you're boyfriend and girlfriend, ask the important questions. Know what matters to you. So I am planning on creating a post that kind of shares some questions to ask when you're dating and getting to know someone. But just having, sometimes having opposite or just even slightly misaligned family or religious values, misaligned lifestyles, political views, or even priorities, like all of that has the potential to break a relationship depending on how important each of those things are to each person. Wow, this was a long one. I really didn't want to have to break it up, so I hope you guys enjoyed this very long form content. I definitely think that these signs can help in dating relationships just so that we can be conscious and aware of things that require some maintenance. But also, in my personal experience at least, sometimes the way that I learn what to do is by knowing what not to do. So, regardless of which side we are in this, in this season, I definitely think there's something in here for everybody. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you guys so much for listening. Feel free to DM me to send me your feedback. Check out the description below to follow me on social media. This podcast is listener supported. Don't forget to subscribe. Remember, you are fully known and deeply loved. I'll see you in the next one.